Good morning, and welcome to another Seize the Day. I trust you guys are waking up feeling refreshed and ready to begin a new day. Today's a little sober day. September 11th brings back all kinds of memories. I can't believe that that was 2001, and you and I, now here it is, almost 24 years later. I'm going to speak today at the chapel at Gordon Conwell, and I just thought that the students at the college would not have been born when all this took place. It's funny how time just passes by, isn't it? But it has left an undeniable mark on the world as a whole. But in many of the studies that we have been engaging in, I've been looking over Old Testament history and recognizing that God is sovereign over all the affairs of men. It goes with our elections, it goes with our country. God, it says, turns the hearts of kings, all to accomplish His will and His purpose. And so I rejoice in that kind of hope, and I find myself in a position where I'm always aware of God's provision, God's grace, and I hope it's the same for you as well. Well, one of the things that I'd like to just bring to your attention this morning is in our study, as we have been working through the Psalms, there is a great passage that is found for us in Psalm 127. As I've reminded everyone, this is one of the last weeks of our Psalm 1 Songs of Ascent series, and if you've missed any of those, you could always go back to our website, bethanychurch.com, where you could find them there, or to our YouTube channel for our Seize the Day broadcasts, and you'll find them there as well. When you get onto our webpage, you're going to see an announcement there for a new series that is starting, and it's called Casket Empty, where casket stands for creation, Abraham, Sinai, kings, exile, temple. And it's four major movements in the history of Israel that mark a number of different occasions. And we have with us this weekend in a seminar on Saturday, September the 14th, Dr. Carol Kaminsky, Old Testament scholar, and the author of this whole series, Casket Empty, that helps us to recognize the one redemptive story that is throughout the Bible. So she's going to be there on Saturday for a 4-hour seminar, and then on Sunday I'm going to interview her, and then we begin this series in earnest after that. It's going to be a 9-week series. Will take us through the journeys of Israel through Sinai. We'll take a break for the holidays and then come back after that with another 9-week series so that we complete the whole Old Testament. And guaranteed, if you stick with us, you're going to learn so much about your Bibles that this book will no longer be a closed book, but really an open one, bringing you, I find, a great deal of encouragement and inspiration. So I hope you are making plans to join with us. There are all kinds of resources, from Bible studies to timelines to maps, all of which can be found on our webpage. That's bethanychurch.com. And I look forward, I'm really excited about this coming series. Well, for today, we're looking at Psalm 127, and in regards to the book of Haggai, and I'll explain that in a moment. If you let me just read Psalm 127. It says, "Unless the Lord builds the house, its builders labor in vain. And unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchmen stand guard in vain. In vain you rise early and stay up late, toiling for food to eat, for He grants sleep to those He loves." And then, as an illustration of how dependent we are upon God, he begins to pivot and talk about children and the fact that they are heritage from the Lord. They're a reward from God. See, it's in vain to do these things, but God is the one who brings blessing. And in those areas that are the most intimate in our lives, our families, right, our children, here you recognize that it's God's hands behind all of that as well. And so this idea then that this psalm brings to the forefront of our dependence upon God, this is the theme then that I wanted to pick up as we began to look through another Old Testament book, which I try to do in these Seize the Days, because they're a way for us to begin to learn our Bibles better and to recognize that themes that you find, they are covered throughout the Scriptures. And so the book of Haggai is one of those examples of a dependence that needs to be fanned into flame between the Lord and ourselves. And so yesterday I began by giving you a little background on the book of Haggai. You open up the passage, and it says, in the second year of King Darius, on the first day of the 6th month, the word of the Lord came through the prophet Haggai to Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and to Joshua, son of Jehozadak, the high priest. So this is a way to anchor this book in a particular period of time. We know that King Darius was the second king of Persia, which means then that this follows the exile of Israel into Babylon. So in a matter of 70 years, this fierce and impetuous people, the Babylonians, who came and swarmed all over Jerusalem, displacing its inhabitants, burning down its city, destroying the temple, all of that took place. And now 70 years later, here we are with a new nation that is now firmly in control. They have extended the boundaries well beyond those of Babylon. And now it is the second year of the second king. The first king was Cyrus, and Cyrus brought them, allowed the Israelites to go back into their land and to rebuild. You get stories about Cyrus in the book of Ezra. But in Haggai, this is 20 years later. So now there's been a shift in kings, and under Darius, now we find the prophet Haggai coming and speaking to the governor and to the high priest, and he has a word from God for them. So what is that word? Well, yesterday we saw this. In verse 2, it says, these people say the time has not yet come for the Lord's house to be built. So what is this talking about? Well, remember, the Israelites were allowed to go back, and one of their first tasks was to rebuild this temple so that the people could begin to once again establish this covenantal relationship with God that would also be seen in the way in which they lived out their worship before Him. And so they're going back, they're all excited. They begin to lay the foundation for this temple. And then what we're discovering now by reading Haggai is that somehow or another this work was put on pause. And so this word comes to Haggai from the Lord, and he says, I want you to tell my people, he says, these people say that the time hasn't come for the Lord's house to be built. But the word that the Lord gave to the prophet Haggai was this. He says, well, if it's not time to build the Lord's house, is it time for you yourselves to be living in your paneled houses while this house remains a ruin? Wow, fair question, right? You don't have time to build my house, but you have time to build your houses. And the paneling displays, this is probably nicer houses. And where are they getting all the material to build these houses? Well, the material was probably ordered so that the temple could be constructed. And here, instead of doing both, you took God's work and put it on hold, and now you're just getting, back to establishing yourself. The dependence then is really on themselves and not on God. In other words, things aren't going to happen unless I make them happen. rather than recognizing that there is a dance that is taking place between our work and God's work. We are to be walking in this spirit with Him. And so when the chastisement comes and says, hey, is it time for you to dwell in your house, but my house lies in ruin? Well, it's a little wake-up call for them. They probably have not demonstrated a dependence on God the way they needed to. And so consequently, listen to what Haggai goes on to say, and I'd like to spend a good portion of our time this morning with you talking about that. It says, now this is what the Lord Almighty says. Give careful thought to your ways. Right? The words here literally mean consider the path, right? This path that you have embarked upon, right? One, just be very clear in your head, a path that has said, well, it's not time to build God's house, but we're going out and we're doing everything we can to establish ourselves, as if you could establish yourself without the Lord's help. Remember what we just read. Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. Unless the Lord guards the city, you get the point, right? There has to be this acknowledgement, this dependence that it is in Him that we live and move and have our very being. So he tells them, give careful thought to your ways. And then notice what he says here. He says, you have planted much, but have harvested little. You eat, but never have enough. You drink, but you never have your fill. You put on clothes, but are not warm. You earn wages only to put them in a purse with holes in it. Now, think about this. When you read through this paragraph here, you can't accuse these people of being lazy. They are working diligently, right, to establish themselves. So they're planting much. They're doing what they can to satisfy their appetites and their thirst, right? They are putting on clothes so that they stay warm. They're out there hustling and working and trying to earn wages. But notice the reverse of this. No matter how hard they work that ground, it doesn't seem to bring the harvest that has been expected. And no matter how much they're eating, they never seem to have enough, right? Because the ground isn't producing it. And here it says you drink, but you never have your fill. Why? Because maybe there is a lack of rain. Maybe there is a lack of water. They could be living through some droughts. So they're working hard. They're eating, but they have not much to eat. They're drinking, not much to drink. They put on clothes, but it doesn't seem to be enough to stave off the climate. And then it goes on and says, and you're earning all this money, but what? It's as if you were putting it in a purse that had holes in it. So in their head, they're thinking, hey, I work hard, I do this thing, and I ought to be then, what? Receiving as a consequence of that action more than I am. And then, see, this is where I want you to really hone in on this, because remember, this whole thing is about dependence, our dependence on God. What could they do to make that harvest increase on their own? They can plant more seed, they can work harder, which evidently that's exactly what they're doing, but it really hasn't brought the harvest that they expected. Right? You're eating, but if you don't have enough food, you're never going to be satisfied. You're drinking, but if you don't have enough water, you're never going to quench that thirst. And about earning wages and putting it in a purse, don't you feel like that sometimes? You get a couple of steps ahead, and then you need new tires on your car. You get a couple of steps ahead, and your water heater doesn't work. You get a little bit ahead, and then you turn around, and your kids, they had this growth spurt. Now they don't fit into any of their clothes. Yeah, or the taxes go up, or 1,001 ways where whatever you earn could feel like you're putting it into a purse, and it's just running through. So then look what, so after setting up that whole scenario, notice now how Haggai, speaking, on behalf of the Lord, says this to the people. He says, give careful thought to your ways. So he says it again. Consider the path that you've taken. And what is that path? That they're building their paneled houses while God's house lies in ruin. He says, look, give careful thought to your ways. He says this to them. He says, go up to the mountains and bring down timber and build the house, so that I may take pleasure in it and be honored. See, something was missing. God, who doesn't need brick and mortar, think about it, God doesn't need a house. The psalmist tells us that the earth is God's footstool and the heavens his throne. Like, he's not in need of all these outward, things. But it was a way to show honor. It was a demonstrating, at least to him, that they were cognizant of the fact that God is the one who orchestrated their deliverance, not only years back from Egypt, but this is exactly what was taking place, that we saw, for instance, with God allowing them to come back and rebuild. It is a fulfillment of the word that God gave to the prophet Jeremiah, all the way back in chapter 22. It's a really interesting read to consider the words of Jeremiah in chapters 21 through 24. Those 4 chapters speak about this coming exile and the condition of God's people, not only about the kings who have turned aside and gone their own way, but also about the prophets who are prophesying lies. And all these things, where the people are supposed to be walking hand in hand with God, they're showing themselves to be rebellious. And Jeremiah says that the time has come where they will be carried off, and for 70 years they are going to be held in captivity. And so now they come back. God opens up the doors. He even opened up the treasury of the king of Persia. You could read about this in the book of Ezra, that the king opens up the treasury and gives them back all of the articles of the temple that were stolen by the Babylonians, of which the Persians conquered. So when the Persians come, beat up on the Babylonians, they take the Babylonians' treasure, discover that this was articles from the temple in Jerusalem, and they give it back to the Jews and say, listen, why don't you go back and build this house? And that's what they do for a season. 20 years later, God's work is on hold, and they're all about their own business. But now God says, how's that been working out for you? See, there's this correlation between hard work and more money. Diligence and now a bigger harvest. Plant more seed, get more harvest. Right? But it doesn't seem to be working out like that. It's less than what they expected. And then God throws in this thought. He says, I want you to give careful thought to your ways. Like, what is it that you have been doing? Think about this for a moment. I think it's because God wants them to recognize that they are no longer seeking their dependence upon God. They are doing exactly what their forefathers had done. And that is try to, live life on their terms, in their way. So he says, no, go back and build the house. And then he adds this so there's no confusion. He says, you expected much. But see, it turned out to be little. What you brought home, I blew away. And why? Because of my house, which remains a ruin, while each of you is busy with his own house. Therefore, because of you, the heavens have withheld their dew, and the earth its crops. right? You don't have enough to eat. You don't have enough to drink. How are you going to fix that? You can't, because you don't control the crop. You don't control the dew. It's not within your purview. You don't have that authority. But here he says, listen, I'm the one that called for a drought on the fields, on the mountains, on the grain, the new wine, the oil, and whatever the ground produces, on men and cattle, and on the labor of your hands. Wow. Are you catching this? They are all sitting around wondering why they're not getting more from all that they have been investing. Do you think in their head there was this, we talk about cause and effect, right? That if you do this, this will happen. Have you ever found yourself, making correlations and recognizing that maybe it's the conclusions that you're drawing to are just not true? See, they're thinking, hey, hard work, let me do all this, and then I'm going to disregard God's work, and then my life will just, I'll still reap the benefits here. It was a wrong assumption. God is the one that can withhold the crops and the dew. You want him on your side, and it's not just that. This is God's sense of blessing. He had made a covenant with his people. If you remember me, right, I will bless you. I will bless you with longevity. I will bless you with the material blessings that are produced from this earth. He says, I'll extend your families. It was a covenant that God made with them. I will be faithful to you. You're to be faithful to me. And not just because God needs it, but that was part of the prescription that would lead to the health of a world that is broken. In other words, God is saying, I'm going to show our relationship, the relationship that God had with Israel, I'm going to show that to the world. And they're going to want some of it. You're going to be my advertisement. You're the billboard that I send out into the world that people are going to read. But what are they reading now? But they're reading of a people who have tried to take life into their own hands and think that I really don't need God at all. Is that the lesson that we're to learn? Because I just read this and it says that God is the one who is blowing away whatever it is that we are harvesting. It's God that has withheld the dew. It's God that has caused even the cattle and man not to have children. Do you think in their heads they were thinking of this cause and effect? That the reason why things were not going well for them was because the Lord's house was still in ruin while they were busy building their own? I just think back on current days. Could there be a possibility that sometimes we're in the situations we're in because we have not demonstrated by our actions and our words that we are a people who live life absolutely dependent on the God in whom we live and move and have our very being? Where every day we recognize that were it not for the Lord, this heart would not be beating, this mind would not be, functioning, this body. And I get it. We live in a broken world, and so the effects of the fall is all around us. You see it spectacularly now, don't we? In this season of the year, as we're embarking on the fall in New Hampshire, all the leaves are going to start turning. People are going to drive just to get the view of all the colors of the trees, right? But like one of my friends from Oregon would tell me, he said, I can't believe that people drive all around New England on a dead leaf tour. a dead leaf tour. Well, that's one way of looking at it, right? Because it's a sign that that things are are changing. They're dying. It's winter's fast approaching. Yeah, this is a great text that reminds us again of dependence. We are interdependent with God. We are co-laborers with Him. We need to engage God's and His world on His terms, not ours. And when we do that, He promises to go with us, to bless us, never to leave us or forsake us. And when it doesn't happen the way we think, we have to put a little pause in our spirit and recognize that it's His will, not mine. And that I have to trust Him by virtue of His character and His attributes, that God is always about doing the right thing. Because after all, look at the life of Jesus. Jesus was perfect. Jesus walked consistently in the path with God, but God also had a path for Jesus to walk. That led to the cross, and that cross led to our salvation. So when you take the long look, you recognize that God's will and His purposes, they are always meant to achieve His highest end. And here, the judgment that Israel had just experienced under Babylon, in 70 years, God turns this around. And now the people are back into their land. They're given another opportunity. And instead of capitalizing on it, they're out there doing their own thing and then wondering why life is so hard. Now, God is calling you and me into a faithfulness to walk hand in hand with Him. My friends, I hope this lesson helps you to seize the day and to recognize that God is good all the time. We'll talk more from Haggai tomorrow. But thank you for being so much a part of this community, and thank you for being here on this Wednesday, September 11th. God bless, my friends.